How's it going, everybody? So there seems to be a lot of discussion lately about disease outbreak and vaccines and how that plays into the non-aggression principle. And a lot of people, I guess, miss the core foundations of the issues. It's often the case, especially when people are more trying to, pick and choose battles over the effects of vaccines and possible issues, isn't it? But there's a bigger core issue, and that's describing the nature of disease. And when it comes to disease, people have to realize that these are things that are living. So when you're talking about viruses, bacteria, you're talking about living organisms. And this basic concept cannot be lost just because those organisms are very small. You have to understand that in as much as, there might be a human who ends up unwittingly becoming a host for a certain creature, we no more expect anyone to, have any sort of mandatory protections against any sort of other creature that would somehow come in and host or feast upon a person, or go and start to nest and grow on a person's property, right? For example, if bees suddenly set up shop in somebody's house and they start attacking the neighbors, it might be something that comes to your attention after the fact because you didn't notice the bees on your property until there was an issue. But now when somebody is trying to defend themselves against those types of microbes, they absolutely can use self-defense against those types of creatures. That's why, of course, people can get types of defenses for themselves, vaccines against those who might not be inoculated. Makes perfect sense. You balance those harms. Now, someone who has those things and is made aware of those things might have a duty to others when on other forms of private property. So again, someone who has crazy disease, they might be at their own property. Okay, that's fine. But if a supermarket or a school or something like, some sort of place where people congregate, I don't know, bar, bowling alley, whatever, if they have a part of their policy that if you have certain types of illnesses, you're not welcome, well, that would be a violation of those terms. Just like if you were to try to fly and you were to suddenly have an intense fever and break out and, maybe not be sure what it is, maybe it's flu, maybe something else, the airline has the right to say, no, you can't fly. Sorry. Or they might ground the airplane and say, okay, well, this person needs to leave this plane. We can't have other people being infected. It all boils down to the fact that it's a private property rights issue and that there is no requirement to defend against other types of living creatures that seek out hosts, whether it's, bees or birds, lions, raccoons, snakes, you know, termites, whatever it is that could be potentially destructive to other people. There is no automatic rule that says, wow, you must defend against all of nature's potential woes that could lead, to exponential growth and harm of other people. No, there is no part of the NAP that requires that of an individual. An individual is just required to not go and then knowingly harm others as far as committing acts of aggression. So again, if you were to have a disease and then were to walk up to somebody intentionally, sneeze on them or try to put your disease on them, with intent, that might be considered something of aggression. But someone who just finds out that they've, contracted something, well, now they have a responsibility to say, okay, well, I need to stay away from other people. They may have a responsibility in terms of private property that, somebody says you're not supposed to be there, you're not supposed to be there. But that's about it. Other people don't have a right to end that person's life or to do something to that person. Everybody has a right to use the fullness of their private property and types of personal self-defense, right? Boosting one's own immune system, vaccinating oneself, doing things to say, hey, these people, if you're sick, don't come in here. And it's funny because you'd think by now this concept that's almost like a Judeo Christian ancient concept, think America, right? That whenever someone was sick of a certain kind, they were quarantined. That makes kind of sense. Like, hey, whoa, don't come here. You'd think that'd be more of a policy. Like, hey, if you have a serious cold, don't come to school or don't come to work. You'd think people would hold that policy much more strongly and say, we prefer that people just didn't do that. But you look everywhere you go, how many businesses, how many schools, how many, institutions, of any sort really have a hard line of like, no, you can't be here the second that you have any sort of possible virus or bacteria. Very few. It's very rare that you're going to find an institution that genuinely says, yeah, you can't come. And that's kind of annoying, especially if you were maybe in middle school or elementary school, high school, college, something like that. And you're like, oh my gosh, that person who has the cold and they're, coughing. Like, there isn't a rule in those schools. They're not saying, oh, you can't come, right? There's no. How often is somebody actually kicked out? It's pretty rare that someone's kicked out if they're sniffling in the back. Yet, there probably should be a policy that people hold and say, hey, you know what? It's understandable that you're sick. Please just stay home. Don't spread it. But that type of ethical thinking, those ethical norms have to be drawn out. They have to become explicit, and people have to recognize those things. And that comes through a broad, robust discussion, understanding of personal property rights, of course, as physical objects are concerned, land and oneself, and the nature of what it is to have a disease of sorts or to have some sort of nuisance about you, and then the level of intent thereafter, right? So again, this is all about knowledge and intent, right? When it comes to this type of non-aggression, we're talking about knowing instances, and that's a big difference. I mean, and it goes across, even other types of legal standards. The difference between an accident and having true criminal intent, or with malice aforethought, if we're talking like murder concepts. But that's a big difference between, oh, I accidentally tripped and like hit somebody versus I went after someone and punched them right in the face with intent, right? There's differences. And even that is recognized under the non-aggression principle. Of course, there's still reasonable use of self-defense when it comes to preventing these types of harms in the immediate sense, but it doesn't give someone a right to then say, oh yeah, you have to do all these preventative measures. These costs have to be put on you because, I feel like this makes me much more safe. No, every person has their own right and ability to take care and defend themselves the best they can. And what that means is that it's good to associate with those who hold those standards as you do. It's good to take care of yourself, of your personal immunity by eating well, taking care of your nutrition, your sleep, and if you want certain types of vaccinations, absolutely go for it. That's on you to absolutely do. But herd immunity by force, again, it violates that core element of the non-aggression principle, and that's consent. So again, this boils down to consent. It boils down to nature, disease. And when you put those together and put them clearly out there, things start to come into picture. So I hope that helped clarify the issues with vaccines, disease, and the non-aggression principle, and of course voluntarism and libertarianism as I so tie it in. And appreciate any thoughts you have down below. Take care.